Hello and welcome to my spring pond cleanout video. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video was to show you just how bad the blanketweed had got in my pond over the winter once I had drained it. I will go on to explain how I keep the beneficial bacteria alive in my filters whilst cleaning the pond, how I give a kickstart in the right direction to the filters after the pond has been refilled, and how I plan to prevent the dreaded blanketweed from ever returning in the future. I had treated with cloverleaf blanket answer around a month or so ago because things had gotten to a desperate state with the way the blanketweed had taken hold in my pond, but sadly things have got a lot worse since my last video. So the decision was made. Drain the pond and clean it out manually with a jet wash and some elbow grease was the order of the day. Once the water had been drained to a level I could easily catch my koi in, I set about moving them to a 12-foot vat that I had set up at the bottom of the garden. If, for whatever reason, I have to remove my koi from my pond, I tend to salt them up for the duration of their removal. On day 1, I will add 3% of dried vacuum salt, and on day 2, I will take the salinity levels to 6%. For this vat, I have calculated that one 25 kilo sack of salt will be required for the duration. This is now what the pond looked like when it was totally drained. As you can see from the picture, it isn't really a pretty sight. So began the slow and boring job of cleaning out my pond. As you can imagine, this took a long time. In actual fact, it took nearly 12 hours to get it totally clean from start to finish, and that included taking out all of gravel and slate chippings in the rockery and waterfall, and giving them a right good clean. From my understanding of this, the blanketweed had basically glued itself onto the liner by the cloverleaf that I'd used. It was almost like trying to jet wash off glue. An absolute nightmare. What I have done, but sadly you cannot see in this video clip, is to rig up my sump pump so that it is constantly sucking out most of the water used by the jet wash. Sadly the flat hose didn't reach all the way to the drain in the road, so I had to jet wash the pavement and the road once the pond had been finished. By this point, I was starting to lose the will to live. It just seemed endless, but once my partner came back home, I managed to rope her into giving me help on the final push. By about midday the following day, the pond was roughly 3/4 of the way full. At this point, I usually add my dechlorinator and pink crystals. For anyone who hasn't seen any of my previous videos, pink crystals is an anti-blanketweed treatment designed for ponds. It works very well, I have found, over the last 2 years, but once the temperature of the water drops below 10 degrees, sadly the blanketweed can get a hold once more, and pink crystals struggles to keep it under control. So, after a lot of research, I have found another product called Blanketweed Resolve by Aqua Source. This is actually a company I am familiar with, as I just so happen to know the owner, and he is a friend of mine. The difference between pink crystals and Resolve is simple. Resolve has a phosphate remover added to the formula and states that it can work even in cold weather. Sadly, pink crystals cannot do neither. So once my pink crystals has run out, I will be going over to Resolve for the foreseeable future. Here I have weighed out the amount of pink crystals I require for my pond. Generally, I'll add around 3 to 4 scoops to the watering can, which has only been used for the pond. Give it a good stir, and then evenly pour it around your pond. One good thing I have found about Resolve is that you can just pour the powder straight into your pond. There is no need to mix it like I am doing here with a watering can. One thing I wanted to show you is my new digital thermometer I purchased from Amazon. If you are like me and not running a heated pond, it's a great and easy way to get an instant temperature readout of your pond. As you can see here, I'm around 12 Celsius. One thing I always like to do, either when I'm starting off a pond's filtration from scratch or after I've cleaned out my filters, is to add a product called Pure Plus Filter Start Gel by Evolution Aqua. This product is available in a few different forms. Personally, I like the liquid gel, but you can also buy concentrated pond bomb or pure pond balls, which are smaller marble-sized balls filled with beneficial bacteria. The gel is made up of live, concentrated beneficial bacteria and enzymes. These beneficial bacteria, whilst helping to convert ammonia and nitrite into less harmful nitrate, help to speed up the maturing process of your filter. Although it is not essential that you add the gel every time you do a filter clean out, I personally would recommend you do. Since I have been adding the gel to my filters after weekly filter clean out, I have had zero ammonia or nitrite readings on my water tests. Before you pour your filter start gel into your filters, give it a right good shake up, making sure all the contents has been mixed up thoroughly. So after the pond had been cleaned out and everything was up and running again, I started to have a think as to why the blanketweed had got such a strong hold in my pond. So the first thing I decided to do was to test the phosphate levels both in my pond and direct from the tap. Phosphate is not dangerous to your koi or aquatic life, even at readings above 5 mg per litre, but it is one of the driving factors that makes blanketweed grow like wildfire. With this in mind, I set about testing my pond water's phosphate levels. I was shocked. It was at 5 mg per litre already. So I tested my tap water, which is the picture you can see above now. It was about 4.75 mg per litre. This is high and most likely the reason why I have had such an issue with blanketweed in my pond over the winter. So with this new information at hand, I decided it was time for some action. After several hours of research, I came across a product called Phosphate Remover by Microbe-Life. It's an American firm that makes this product, and from what I can tell from the research and reviews I could come across on the internet, it generally got good reviews. The next day, I took a trip over to my local koi dealer and talked it over with him. He had enough in stock for me to take there and then. Although he had never used the Phosphate Remover himself, I got it a little cheaper as he was curious to see what the results would yield. So I went home and set about adding it to my pond. What I did was add about 3/4 pond water to my watering can and add about half of the bottle of Phosphate Remover. Once the watering can was emptied, I repeated the process. It does not say on the container that you should leave your UVs on or off, so if in doubt, turn them off for the duration. The water went a very nice iridescent blue colour, and visibility of the koi and even the bottom drain became hard to see. This lasted several days until it had totally cleared from the water. Time for a phosphate test. Sadly, it had not done a thing. I was still sat at around 5 mg per litre of phosphate in my pond. The instructions do say you can add another dose 7 days after the initial treatment, but this is starting to become very costly, so it was time for a bit of a rethink. What I came up with was a little experiment with my pond water and the product Blanketweed Resolve. I took a pint full of pond water and put a tiny little bit of Resolve into it and left it for 24 hours. After the 24 hours had passed, I tested the phosphate levels for both the pond water and the water that I'd treated with the Resolve. To my disbelief, the phosphate levels in the pint were sat at 0, yet the levels from my pond were still sat at 5 mg per litre. This was a nice surprise. With only adding the pink crystals into my pond about 3 weeks ago, I was a little unsure when it would be safe to add the Resolve into my water. So I messaged my friend who had designed it, and he stated that it would be perfectly okay to add it now. There would be no danger. Now usually I will give it a good month before adding any other treatments into my pond, but I trust my friend's judgment, so I cracked on. I have only added the Resolve into my pond this afternoon, so I am not yet able to give you any results, but in my next video I will let you know how it has gotten on. Since my last video, I have added 2 new fish to my pond, a little shower at around 15 centimeters and a sankey of around 40 centimeters. Both are doing very well and eating like little troopers. I have had to remove one of my koi and place it into a heated vat. It has just started to develop what looked like an ulcer. The scales near its dorsal fin were slightly raised and looked slightly pussy underneath. The koi was swiftly removed from the pond, sedated and given an injection of antibiotics into both pecs. The area of infection was cleaned up and germaline was added as a topical treatment. The vat was heated to a comfortable 22 degrees. 3% salt was added to the water and a course of aquaflavin will be administered over the next couple of weeks. So far though, the ulcer has not broken out, so I might have just gotten it in time. I hope you've liked this video and found it interesting. Any questions, leave a comment in the comment section and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next video, bye for now.